All right, what is up, everybody? How's it going? Welcome to Comic Book Radio. This is episode 175. I'm your host, Peter Cimetti, publisher, founder of Alterna Comics, writer, editor, all that stuff. Now, I'm not understanding tonight the camera. It's a little closer than it usually is. What's going on, camera? Okay. Still looks a little close. It is what it is. Apologies. Now, tonight's episode is going to be about editing comics. This is a more complex topic than I think most people will realize. And we're going to do a deep dive into that. Before we get into it, I want to say hello to those of you in the chat. We got Rex Doom. What's up, Rex Doom? Hope you're doing well. Thank you for that comment there. Killer Kovacs. What's up, Killer Kovacs? How you doing? The Elk of Antioch. What's up? Hope you're doing well. So yeah, editing comics. Something that it is a necessity. It happens, I think, sometimes with creators without them even realizing. I'm not talking, though, specifically about that. I'm talking more about the role of an editor, which is crucial, unbelievably crucial, a vital thing. And it's not just proofreader. It's not just the person who makes sure words are spelled right, or the grammar usage is correct, or sentence structure, is working out. That's unfortunately what a lot of people think editing is. Editing in comics is different than editing in film or television. It's different than editing novels, prose, books. It is like being the overseer of how that comic is going down. Ideally, you would be the script supervisor, story editor, art director, even continuity supervisor, making sure that everything is flowing within continuity depending upon the type of series you have. Proofreading is just a little bit of what goes on. Just a little bit. And it is, to be perfectly honest, it's the least vital of what an editor is going to do. It's important, but it is not as important as a lot of the other stuff. Now, in order for you to be able to be a fully functioning editor, to be that important part, you have to understand not just the language of comics. You have to also know how to communicate why something works, why something doesn't, and how to make it work. You have to be a communicator in terms of coordinating among the creators or creative team involved. Now, depending upon if you're talking about independent comics, creator-owned comics, licensed comics, many people refer to them as the big two, DC, Marvel, that kind of a thing, you're going to be dealing with different fires to put out as an editor. But at the end of the day, if you're an editor with next to no experience in terms of writing, art, understanding it, any of that, if you're just someone who wants to go in there and critique, you're not going to do well as an editor. If you're someone looking for a fast track to get your foot in the door, you're not going to do well as an editor. Now, you might do well. There's tons of people who they've got jobs. They've got jobs and they're there and they're doing what they're doing, and not just in comics, everywhere. Doesn't mean they necessarily do them well. successfully to the benefit of the people they work with, or the product they're making, or the customer's audience that they serve. If you want to be successful as an editor, and I don't mean monetarily, I don't mean you get gigs, you have money, this and that, whatever, jobs coming your way. I mean that you're making the best possible book that you and your team can make. You can get out there in front of the reader. You have to understand every aspect of comic book making. And there's no way that that is going to happen unless you experience it for yourself. So I'm going to relay some of my experiences when I was starting out, because I'm the last person who's ever going to say you need a publisher to get something out there. I know that's weird, right? You're thinking, well, Pete, you're a publisher. Why would you say that? I wasn't always a publisher. I didn't go through a traditional route of being a publisher. I kind of came upon it by accident from just doing this stuff over and over and over again and being put in a position where I felt like, well, maybe I can do this. And man, let me tell you, there were days where and I'm still sometimes like that, thinking, can I do this? But you got no choice sometime. You just got to go and do it. But at no point in time, when I was starting off especially, did I feel like I need to just tell people what to do and they should just listen to me and I have no idea what I'm talking about and that should be fine. I went into a lot of it with research, with doing as much work as I could, did a lot of work for free, work for experience, not for exposure. And I started off doing a lot of work for free at first, especially because, to be perfectly honest, I didn't feel comfortable charging people for what I was doing. I barely knew what I was doing. I was learning from them helping me out. So I was building up my worth. I was building up my value, my skill set, building up my confidence. Couldn't go in there and say, I should get paid this, that, and the other thing. And it was more like, I'm here to learn. And I was either going to pay for an education to learn that. And I went to school for graphic design. But in terms of comic book making, that's a different world. So learning lettering, inking, art, writing, aspects of editing as you go about. That took years and years and years. Lots of trial and error. And I'm still learning to this day. But I find that there's a lot of people who, for whatever reason, especially when it comes to the position of editor, there's not a whole hell of a lot of that kind of mentality, wanting to learn every aspect as much as they possibly could, so that they could at least be competent enough to understand what it takes to not just create a comic, but what it takes for other people to create a comic, and how to communicate with them on why something may be more successful here than there, why this is working, why that's not working, how to flesh out characters, how to keep the pacing of a story, character design, logo design, the formatting, all of that. And then on top of that, you can get like script development, story editing, etc. And you go in further and further into that. Now, it's not to say that that can't be learned. Obviously, everything can be learned. But there's a difference between rushing into it without any of the experience and then saying, I'm an editor in a self-proclaiming way. Then there is saying, okay, I want to be an editor. How would I go about that? Now, I always compare it to, and I see a bunch of you guys in the chat. Thank you guys for being here. I'm going to be getting to you guys in just a second. I've seen a bunch of people where, and I give this comparison a lot, where for me to maybe give them the analogy of a sports team, it's like wanting to be the coach of a team and you have no idea how to play the game. And that's what it's like if you're an editor without experience under your belt. To prove your skill set, your value, your worth, what you're bringing to the book, why someone should listen to you when you give that advice. Is it coming from a place of authority? Is it coming from a place of experience? Or is it coming because maybe you heard someone else say it? Maybe you listened to this whole show tonight for an hour or so. You go, yeah, he seems like he knows what he's doing. They had a New York Times bestseller and he's published 400 something books and they've been around for 18 years. And yeah, I'll just repeat whatever Pete said. And now I'm an editor. No, you're not. You just heard me talk about stuff. The only way you're ever going to know what you're capable of doing and building your confidence and your competence is by doing it. And the only way you're going to get to do something like this is by building up your experience and by making sure that you are first betting on yourself. Every great editor in comics ever started off learning every aspect of comics. No one just walks in and is like, I'm an editor. And that's how that is. And they're like, oh, what have you done? Because generally it is a position when someone is to say that you would imagine they have experience. They've been doing this for a while. They're well versed. They've got some success under their belt, some achievements. They can point to them. And that is what gives them that authority. Because they've been proven. Not just to themselves, but to others. So if you go in there and you don't really have much experience, editor should be the last thing on your mind at this point in time. That might be where you want to get. That might be where you wind up. But at that point in time, that is not where you are when you're starting off. There's a lot of stuff to learn before you get to that point. So that's the biggest thing in terms of what I'm seeing with a lot of different problems in comics nowadays. If you look back to all the great editors in comics, they could talk the talk because they walked the walk. Too many people talking the talk nowadays. So before I dive further into it, I want to say hello to you guys again because we got more people in here. Thank you guys for being here. Elk of Antioch says, editor, crusher of dreams. I would prefer to think that a good editor, bad editors are crusher of not just dreams. Bad editors are crusher of, destroyer of wallets and time. Because they destroy the reader's time and money. They crush the spirit, not just of the reader and the creator, but of the entirety of the medium. Bad editors, oh boy. Bad editors are like those teachers that you get where they didn't have the best time in school and now they're going to take their bad days in school out on everyone that they teach. We've all had a teacher like that where you're like, you're not a good teacher. You're just here for revenge. Maybe you weren't popular, maybe whatever. And now you've got the power, so they're gone power mad and they're not putting whatever at the best interest of the situation. They're all about ego, their ego. You have to set your ego aside as an editor. If you're putting your ego in front at all points in time and you're not just trying to make the best thing possible and coordinate that with, and the same thing goes with creators. There's creators with massive egos as well that can't take direction or coaching from a great editor. So things need to mix. It takes two to tango. But a great editor helps dreams come to life. They do anything but crush them. But I know you're joking. I know. Chuck, what's up, Chuck? Thank you for coming a member of the channel. I appreciate that. Rick Joseph, what's up, Rick? Thank you for being here tonight. Rick is a great letterer. If you guys need a letterer, reach out to Rick. Good dude, easy to work with, easy to talk to, solid letterer. Reach out, which is a very important aspect of comics too. Very overlooked. Can't say how much. Tons and tons of submissions over the years. One of the biggest things, the biggest problems on most of the submissions I've seen, lettering. Get a good letterer. Rick Joseph, good letterer. Rex says, so many editors are so jaded and want to take their failures out. See, what I was talking about, what a bad editor is like. What's up, Ben? How's it going, Ben? A bad editor is the equivalent of, you could say like those who can't create edit poorly. And not just edit. Don't just stop it there. Edit poorly. And there's no, if you're a great creator, if you can create stories, if you can create art, if you can create solid worlds, universes, character development, everything that goes into storytelling, if you can do that, and you can communicate why. The why is important. Because some people can create really well, but they don't know why. I've had a lot of conversations with people over the years, especially even on this show. I don't know if it's an innate thing. I don't know if it'll come later on, and once they kind of analyze their process or whatever it is. Some people can create and do an excellent job of it, but haven't broken it down, and they don't know why. If you know why, if you can communicate why, if you communicate why it works, why it doesn't, then you have the makings, potential makings of a good editor. But yeah, a bad editor, man, oh man. Comics for Life says editor seems to be the final word in the build of the book. Not just the final. It's kind of like the buck stops here sort of a thing. But not just the final, but a good editor along the way is the individual who will make sure that things don't get out of hand. That problems stay small and get solved. That they never become a massive, huge, insurmountable problem among the story. And this can really be something where people will notice if it's a large story or a character with a lot of history or that kind of a thing. If you don't have an editor on hand that understands the ins and outs of what's going down, that's not going to turn out well at all. And sometimes, again, it's difficult to always say when you've got a bunch of people in the mix creating, because like I said before, there are egos on both sides of the fence. You can have a great editor in there, and there's an ego involved in the creative team that they don't want to listen to anything, and things go down, and it's very, very bad. And then there's also the egos of the editor, where they think they know what they're doing for the story, or maybe it's not even for the story. Maybe they're just exacting revenge in that scenario, which is sometimes the case with things. And they will, on purpose, tank that story, that creator, just because. Especially if they feel like they have job security and that creator does not. Now, you don't see that so much in the independent sphere, especially creator-owned, because there really isn't job security for an editor in a creator-owned independent comic for the most part. That person, more than likely, is being hired by that creator. So the power dynamic is a bit shifted. But in the corporate comics world, you can absolutely have a situation where editors feel like they have tenure, more or less. They've got the job security, and the creators do not. And if they don't get along or like that creator for whatever type of reason, they can make that creator's life a hell. So that is a very unfortunate scenario, because again, it is not a scenario that is putting the reader as number one, the story as number one. It is not doing anything but being a self-serving thing for the editor's ego in that case. That's a shame. That is a shame. Because the goal should always be to be creating something that lasts, that's important, leave a legacy behind. Comic Book Odyssey says, I see a lot of people connecting artists to writers, but we also need a network of editors. Yeah. And that's something as well where I'm seeing a lot of people out there that are editors, but I can't really wholeheartedly recommend a lot of them for one reason or the other. There's people that I think are pretty competent as creators sometime, and then they go into the editing sphere and I'll see their name on a book and that they're the editor. And I look at the book, or I even have backed the book and I get the book and I'm like, was there really editing on this? I mean, not to be rude about it, but I struggle at times because there'll be obvious glaring errors in terms of development of the story, the plot, the characters, the placement, the art direction, where all it would be is a simple word from an editor to say, look, proportions here are wonky. The composition here is askew. The storytelling is off. Placement of lettering here doesn't make sense. All these different things that an editor would be responsible to help out with. But I also don't know the extent at which they have the power to impose their suggestions. So, and I'm talking specifically in this instance in creator-owned indie comics, that kind of a thing. Because sometimes, unfortunately, what I talked about before, where people go editor and they hear proofreader, a lot of the times that's what an editor, being credited as an editor on a book, is doing, and that's what they're there for. They're there to proofread and make sure spelling and grammar is up to snuff as much as they possibly can. They're not necessarily there to help oversee, to help develop. And it's unfortunate because the credit maybe should be something like proofreader, or even, script supervisor or something along those lines, as opposed to editor. Because that's where I find there's a lot of people maybe that are misconstruing or misunderstanding or maybe being miscredited as editor. And it's to no fault of anyone, really. Maybe it's just that's what the person who hired them wanted them to do. But like anything else, and I've talked about this before, if you go into a position where you're working on a comic or you're hired for any job ever, and you just do the bare minimum for that job. We've all been there. I get it. You usually do that when you don't really care about the job. You don't care about who you work for. You don't care about the job. You don't care about the customer or whatever it may be. Quite frankly, you probably hate that job. Again, we've all been there. But when you're in a position where, you don't hate that job, or, maybe you love that job, you love what you're doing, you want to put your best foot forward, because this is also how you're building up your resume. You're building up your experience. You want to make sure you're doing the best possible job you can do, whether you're getting paid nothing, whether you're getting paid $100 a page, whether you're getting paid $1,000 a page. Because at the end of the day, the next job to come along, the next person to come along, or that reader who has that, if they look at your name and they constantly see it synonymous with quality, that's tremendous. That's worth more than any page rate you're ever going to get on that specific project. So do your best to always do your best. And I know that sounds like obvious advice, but I've seen a lot of instances where that doesn't seem like the case. It seems like people are like, whatever. Your name's on it or the logo's on there or whatever it may be. And you're like, well, I didn't get paid for that. Sure, that looks horrible, sounds horrible, reads horrible. It's not my job. It's not my book. I don't own that character. that story? Why would I say anything? And that's an unfortunate attitude to have. But a lot of people have it. And sometimes I get it, but quite frankly, most of the time I don't. Cole King says, we have tornadoes close by, so I can't stick around. Oh, man. Cole, brother, be careful. Be safe, brother. Says, great topic that I really need to hear. And says, gifted 5 comments. Thank you, man, for gifting those 5 memberships. I hope you guys in the chat, if you got one, enjoy it. You got it for a month. And hopefully you enjoy your time at the Comic Book Lounge. And you maybe want to stick around. 99 cents a month for a membership. You get access to over 100 videos that have been archived. And then also, you can have fun with the emojis in the chat. But Cole, I hope, sending some prayers out to you, man. You and yours and everybody out there. Hope everything's okay. Hope everything will be okay. Comics for Life says, any editors whom you look up to or acknowledge when editing? Oh, man. It's so just... I was talking with Chuck Dixon a few months ago, and I uploaded a clip about this. Archie Goodwin is just synonymous, I think, with solid editing and solid communication. I don't think there's a person in the entire industry that ever worked with Archie Goodwin and I didn't work with him, but I enjoyed a lot of the stuff he edited. And you can see, and I know a lot of creators who have worked with him, and all of them, they got nothing but the best stuff to say about working with Archie Goodwin. But you can see from some of your own favorite comics, let's say, look at the editor on them. I guarantee you'll see the similar names popping up over and over again. And then look at some of the comics that you really don't like, that you really haven't enjoyed. And again, look at the creative teams, look at the editor, see what's what. Comic Book Odyssey says, Pete, do you offer editing services or know people who freelance edit? Working on a comic could use an editor. I do offer editing services, but not at this specific moment. Not at this specific moment. I've got too much on my plate. But maybe that changes. Maybe that changes down the line. I'll definitely be letting everybody know when and if that does change, and I'm taking on more editing work. I'll dive into some of my experiences as an editor at Alterna, because I've done extensive editing and helping, more like a ghost editor, but doing everything an editor pretty much does without really getting credit for it. And I was happy to do that. I mean, I want to make the best book possible with whoever comes along. And then other things like being a script supervisor or an art director or just another set of eyes to make sure that if there's red flags popping up, I'm able to say, look, you got to go back in there and reconsider your approach on this and kind of run down the whole story for them. But I'll get into that in a moment. What's up, Death Metal Hero? Hope you're doing well. Says a great editor is worth their weight in gold and will help you hone your story to a fine edge. I agree. 10.8 says always research examples and references with any person you're going to work with. That's true. Rex says dealt with an editor who somehow had never heard of writing in the present tense. But how do you explain that? What? You know, the only thing I'm ever surprised at when it comes to anything in comics is the fact that I still get surprised. So there that is. Vince Moore says, I agree with everything you said so far, Pete. I was lucky to get my start editing because of a customer from my comics retail days. It's been an interesting ride so far. Well, there you go. There you go. And like anything else, you know, just because you start off in a certain spot doesn't mean that you necessarily end up still in that same spot. Most people, that's not the case. You know, so as you accrue all this experience over the years, and maybe you eventually become an editor, you're still going to find that when you start off becoming an editor, that there's things to learn. So even that's going to be an experience where you develop and hone your skills further. It's not that, oh, you've accrued all this experience, now you're whatever this position is, and you have all the answers, all the solutions, everything works great, everything's amazing all the time. You're still going to have to learn a lot of stuff. You're still going to have to learn not just the ins and outs of your new job, new position, whatever that may be as an editor, but you're going to have to learn what that means. Because you're gonna, no matter what, I'm telling you, you're gonna go into it with a preconceived notion that this is what it's like, and when you get there, you're like, oh, I didn't realize this is what it's like. I'm telling you, that's like that with everything. It has nothing to do with comics. Everything in life, you go in there with this whole, this is how it's gonna be. It'll be like this. It'll be like that. That's what I'll do. And then you get into it, and you're like, I didn't think this would happen. I didn't think it would be like that. I didn't think I would have to do this every time. So, try to get that naive mindset out of the way. Just be prepared. Expect the unexpected kind of a thing. Rex says that it was an online magazine. He decided to publish the story. Then the payment that was promised disappeared. And so did I. Well, it happens. It happens. Sorry to hear that. Comics for Life says, how hard is editing others as well as yourself at the same time? And what do you learn from playing both roles at the same time? Okay, I'm going to star a couple of these so I can get back to them, because some of these are pretty good. And I want to explain a couple things first. What's up, Creators Outlet? Hope you're doing good. Let's see. I'm going to keep on going through. Beampad, how's it going, Beampad? Let's see here. Crenshaw, what's up, Crenshaw? Says, can't listen now, but we'll definitely listen to the replay tomorrow. I appreciate that. All right, so going into my experiences as an editor at Alterna. Now, it's creator-owned, so I can only do so much. One of the biggest things as an editor that you don't want to do, which is usually the hallmark of an amateur, overeager, passionate editor, someone who really cares, is you care too much. And what I mean by that is you have to understand that you are an editor. You're not a co-creator. You're not a co-writer. You're not the co-artist. And that's something that I went through early on when I wasn't being an editor, but I was being relied on too heavily for my input and my advice. And I had to eventually stop myself. And I went, I'm basically co-creating this book right now. I'm advising them on how to develop characters, how they should look, what plot points and backstory they should have, all these different things. And that was an interesting experience for me. I didn't think it was done with malice or anything like that, because I think they were inexperienced about it as well at that point. But I had stopped about maybe 6 months into helping them with what they were doing, saying, hey, any ideas you need to bounce off of me? And this was years ago. Any ideas you need to bounce off me, feel free, that's what I'm here for. And then it would turn into this kind of dependency. And I was more than eager to help because, hey, I'm publishing this book. I felt like this was part of my responsibilities. I want to make sure that the best thing gets made, and to be perfectly honest, I don't know if I would have done it differently, because I really wanted to help make sure the best thing got made, because I'm always thinking of making the best possible story for the reader to enjoy. The only way that I would have done it differently would have been to basically stop it and say, look, you need to either hire me or someone else specifically as your editor, or give me co-creator credit or co-writer credit at the very least. And we're now creating this story together. But the thing is, I didn't want to be a co-creator or a co-writer. I wanted to maintain them having their story and me being more than happy to help them out with what they needed help with, but without doing too much for them. And it got into a position where there became this weird kind of blending of job responsibilities in terms of creating this story. So eventually I just kind of cut it off. I just stopped. I said, look, I feel like this is getting too much in terms of what I'm doing on this story. I have all these other things I have to do, all these other books that I have to take care of. I can't possibly devote that much time and dedication and direction to all of the others as well. So you're going to have to figure out your own way with the rest of the story. And then I'll come in at the end. And if I see anything that looks glaring, I'll let you know. And they were fine with it. There wasn't any kind of fight or squabble or anything weird like that. But it was a note to myself not to get in too deep when doing that kind of thing with creators that I was publishing. Especially because, again, Alterna is 100% creator-owned. Alterna doesn't own anyone's properties. Alterna is essentially just a publishing label where we have the publishing rights and we get the book out there. So we do pre-press, we do the formatting, we help to market, we help to list everything, get it out there. When we had distribution, we did all of that. Now that we don't have distribution, we basically do self-distribution. So there's still all the mindset and stuff that needs to get done with distribution, but instead of it going to retail, then to the reader, it goes right to the reader. So we cut out the middleman. That's really the only difference. But as far as editing goes and things like that, there were many titles over the years that I kind of ghost edited, and in some case would even help ghost co-write. And that was an agreement that I at least worked out with the creators. And I felt like I don't need the credit on this. I just want to make the best book possible. We'll put it out there, and that'll be that. And I'm not going to name names on that front out of respect for those individuals, because I don't want anybody to look at them like, that they were taking advantage. They weren't. It was agreed upon type thing. It was for me to kind of just help them out, and then that would be that. But a couple different titles that I edited at Alterna over the years, and helped in various ways with development of story. Trespasser, Gods and Gears, Mr. Crypt, Mighty Mascots, especially issues 4 to 6. What else is there? There's a couple others it came out on a Wednesday. I'm not necessarily editing stories, but I'm compiling and making sure that the stories that get selected work and fit within the issue. And at times I've had to come back and tell the people working and making on the stories, you got to get a different letterer, or you got to do a revision here to bring it up to snuff a bit, but nothing extensive. Same thing with the If anthology, doing things like that as well, curating that, compiling that, giving notes back to people on what maybe they need to revise. The biggest thing I think I probably gave notes on would be composition and lettering. And then the third probably would be like proportions and anatomy. Maintaining consistency of figure, faces especially, maintaining consistency with the faces. But nothing too tremendous. Writing and character development, that's a different thing. So there's been instances where I've helped out with character development moments where I felt like the creator was not aware of what they were building up and that they were ignoring other characters. Now, sometimes they listened to me and sometimes they didn't. Again, creator owned. So I'm not being hired necessarily for that input. But sometimes I'd be fortunate enough to work with creators that were at Alterna that respected my opinion enough to take it into consideration and see what I was talking about. And as I would explain, look, you've got this character being developed here, but then you completely ignore them in favor of this character that's not as developed and nowhere near as interesting. Maybe work on developing this character, this angle in the story, and flesh it out further. Define motivations, define what it is that they're after, etc. I've talked about this a lot before. A big thing with character development is you really want to make sure the story isn't necessarily happening to them, even though it might feel that way. And if done right, it seems like that's what's occurring. But the reason that the story is moving forward is because of character decisions being made. Even if a situation is being imposed upon a character, that would never happen unless that character made the million decisions that it took to get them in that moment of that time. So every single thing that happens to that character, you have to keep in mind that even if it feels plot driven, it is still because the characters put themselves in that situation. And so there's important things to think about when you're developing your characters and your story to make them feel not just like they're there because you said so, everything's happening because you said so. Things happen because characters will them to happen. It's a very different process than things happening in a story because the writer said they should happen. Whenever that occurs, when someone is writing a story and all of a sudden events and scenarios and characters are just, they feel like they don't have any thought process of their own. There's no decision making. There's nothing there. They're not these living, breathing kind of individuals, but they're kind of just going through the motions because the plot is willing them to do so. And they're kind of like these zombies within their own lives within that story. Most of the time, you're not gonna resonate with that character because there's kind of nothing there to resonate with. But if there's a character and they're struggling with decisions and they are sometimes maybe reluctantly making a choice, maybe sometimes they're wholeheartedly making that choice with every fiber of their being, they're compelled to do that because they believe in what they're doing. That's when you're creating living, breathing characters, individuals. But if you're just kind of going through the motions with it because you're more concerned with telling the story than making sure the characters are living the story, it's a fine line, but it's so important. And that's the job also of an editor. And it's also the job too, if you're not working with an editor, you need to self-edit. You need to understand, take a step back, view it objectively, as if it was not you making this story. And I know sometimes that's hard to do, especially when you're starting off. But you have to be able to do that. If you can't, and I would strongly encourage, take a day or two or even a week away sometimes from it. Come back to it with fresh eyes. Because the whole thing that happens when people say come back to it with fresh eyes, it doesn't mean that like it's going to change to you just because you walked away. But what happens is that you have these ideas of how it's supposed to be when you're building up what you're doing, whether that's writing a story or art, whatever. And whether you're frustrated with it or not, whether you love it, take a day or two away, come back to it. And the reason that I say that is because when you do come back to it, you've had a chance to have other things occur to you, other thoughts enter your mind. You're not thinking anymore really about this problem you're trying to essentially solve. And you're going to tackle it now with that new perspective. And it doesn't have to be completely new. It doesn't have to be this whole different thing. But you reset a bit. And now maybe you come up with a different way, a better way, usually, to approach a scenario. Or you go, no, this is great. This is great. This still hits the way I want it to hit. But either way, no matter what, I do encourage, take some time away from it. Not too long. At the most, a week. At the most. But maybe a day or two, depending on what your timeline, your deadlines, etc. Even sometimes people, when you've been doing it long enough, maybe you just need a couple hours. Just take a couple hours, get away from it completely, do something else. Especially if you do kind of like a monotonous type of task. I know it sounds weird, but if you exercise, if you clean, if you do some kind of you're on autopilot sort of task. You're able to come back to it with a fresh perspective, kind of like a palate cleanser. I really recommend that. And then if you can't do that, and this is especially for people who, to get into that self-editing mode, if you have an editor at that point in time, send it to them. Send it to them. Say, okay, this is what I've got so far. This is what I'm working on. Can you just take a quick look at this for me? How's this feeling to you? And don't do anything. Don't preload that question to the editor. Don't say, I think I could do this with that, and I'm not so sure about this other thing. Just give it to the editor and say, hey, could you take a look at this for me? Let me know what you think. Because if you do something like you go into it and you tell your editor, I don't really like the way this is going, or I really like that, or, I think maybe I could do this differently. If you start doing that and giving them these things, you're going to find that many editors, they want to keep their job, or at least you, in their good graces. And so if you focus on these certain things for them to address, most of them are just going to address those things. They're not really going to address everything else. And they're certainly not going to let you know about that thing that you like. They don't like that so much. They're not going to let you know about that, and vice versa. So just give it off to the editor, let them get you their notes, etc. While also, especially a good way to do that too, and test your editor. Test your editor. If you are really not happy with how you're developing a story or a character, very frustrated, you think you're not doing it right, and you've hit a wall, and you've got an editor on board, give it to them. Give it to the editor. Do they spot what you spot? It's a good way to test. Good way to test. And it's some people might go, oh, well, that's kind of cruel or this or that. No, not at all. Not at all. Your editor, at the core of it, they should be able to communicate to you, again, why it works, why it doesn't, and how you can make it work. So if something is not working, not just like they go back to you and they're like, I don't know, it's not working. It needs a little something. If your editor's like, it needs a little something, but I don't know what that something is, you figure it out. That's going to be a weird scenario. I think you're going to find yourself going, why do I have an editor? Why do I have an editor if they don't even know why something's working, why something isn't working, if they can't communicate to me to help me out in this scenario? Even to just nudge you along, not to take over, not to say you should do this, you should do that, make the character this way, make the story that way, but that they can't tell you, okay, this isn't working here because X, Y, and Z. It'd be more effective here if you did A, B, and C. This character, this story, this plot, you're developing this in this kind of way. This part's confusing. This part's great. This part you need to emphasize. Those are great editor notes of what to give you back in terms of what your story is having in abundance and lacking, and how it can get to a point of abundance and be good, be solid. And maybe sometimes even say, get this part. This part doesn't belong here right now. It might never belong here in this story. You have to focus on what it is that you're trying to tell here. That's all aspects of making a good editing decision. So before I go a little bit further, let's see. ODF says, great to see Mr. Cimetti's Bitten Truth once again. Well, thank you, ODF. Comic Book Odyssey says, interesting topic. Got to hit the hay, but thanks, Pete, and everyone in the chat. Appreciate that. Thank you for sticking around. Death Metal says, reality seldom goes exactly to our expectations. Ain't that the truth? Which is also a good thing to bring into the aspect of your storytelling. That resonates. When things just don't seem to go exactly as planned. Let's see. Get a little Steinbeckian with it. Comics for Life. Comics for Life, you always got such good questions. I'm going to star yours and get back to them. Please don't be offended by that. If anything, I really appreciate what you have to ask. I want to get to it and make sure I'm giving the time to it when the time comes. Let's see. Death Metal Hero says, I would say being an art director is arguably one of the most difficult jobs in editing. It takes a specific type of person and a keen eye. I agree. And that's an important aspect because, okay, so to get into that topic a little bit, when you're doing the art direction part of editing, you have to understand not only what you're seeing in front of you, you have to understand what has yet to come or what is being developed and how that is manifesting. So you have to have the vision of an artist, even though you may not really be an artist. And what I mean by that is that you may not be someone who can take pencil to paper and will into existence what's going to be on there. But you have to know when you see it, it works or it doesn't. It is clear storytelling or it isn't. This is confusing. This is great. This works. This isn't as successful. The anatomy here is off. The angle here is off. You're not allowing the flow of the story, the eye line of the lettering, the placement of figures, the placement of lettering, even the context in which, because the lettering is just the visual voice of the writing. So if you have writing that is overtaking the art, and we've all seen this, the art is getting buried in the writing. You know who's to blame for that? A lot of people say the writer. Yeah, sure. But check if there's an editor. If there is an editor, they are to blame. 100%. 100%. I don't even give any blame. Like, a lot of people will beat up on certain writers because of the way that they will do that. They'll take it over. They're not to blame. I don't blame them. I blame the editor. Same thing goes with the art. There are people who will go, wow, that is horrible. This artist is awful. Look at what they did here. Look at how they did. This is just bad. You, in that aspect, when you're reading it, and you have those things that you're saying either out loud to yourself, that is what the editor should have been doing. That is 100% the fault of the editor. 100. Because that is their job. It's the artist's job to give you a lot to work with. It's the writer's job to give you, the editor, a lot to work with. It is your job as the editor to edit. So if you see that occur, stop for a second. Check to see, does that book have an editor? And if they do, they are to blame. Every time. 100%. Because there'll be moments where you're like, I know that this is a writer that's competent and it may be good, maybe great. Same with the artist. They're good, maybe even great. You've seen their other work. You know what they're capable of. Look at the editor. Look at who was the editor on that book that you enjoyed so much. When you thought that writer who's not doing so good now, or that artist who's not doing so good now, when you thought they were doing great, look at the editor. I guarantee you, different editor. Every time. And if it's the same editor, look at who's above. Who was the editor-in-chief? Now, this usually pertains to just the bigger companies. But there is always someone above who let the shoddy work get put out. Like years ago when DC had that thing that happened, what was that? the Joker with the Batgirl cover. I forget the artist at this point in time. But it was like that thing with the Killing Joke. And it was a variant cover. And they were acting as if like no one really knew that was going to get put out. I looked at that. I'm like, you kidding me? You know how many people look through and give approval upon that kind of stuff? It doesn't just like, oh, it just got out one day. And instead of deciding to stand by the artistic choice, whoever that person was that had the responsibility to give approval, or the many individuals along the way that had the responsibility to give approval, they more or less, and this has happened many times, you'll see them try to like throw the artist or the writer or whoever under the bus. Now, not maybe in a very active kind of way, but usually in a passive way. And what I mean by that is you won't hear the editor be mentioned. You won't hear any of the art direction be mentioned. You won't hear any of the editor-in-chief response be mentioned. It's usually just this cover by so-and-so. This cover by so-and-so is getting pulled because it is controversial for this, that, and the other reason. So you don't hear or see the names of the people who gave approvals. You hear or see the name of the person who made the thing that got approved. And that's not cool. And that happens time and again. There's a lot of instances throughout the years where stuff like that happens. But again, another sign of a good editor is giving credit where credit's due. And when it isn't due, and there's a mistake, owning that mistake and not throwing the creative team under the bus. Now that's, again, more relegated to corporate comics. When you have the independent creator-owned comic, editing gets a little bit more compartmentalized. So there are some people where they just want to hire a proofreader. They just want to hire someone who, can give them a quick look and say, does this look okay to you? Everything look fine here? Most of the time, and it's unfortunate, and I've dealt with this with creators over the years where they're like, hey, can you give me your editing eye on this? And I'm like, it's done, right? You've got everything already made and done. How much do you want me to say? Because do you want me to tell you that there's like 20 pages here that need to get redrawn because they don't make sense, and the story and the plot and the character development's going off the rails? Or do you just want me to see what you've got, know that nothing is getting changed, and just tell you you can probably change some of the writing because that's an easier fix than changing the art and the development of the story? Which one do you want me to do? And I know that there's editors that are competent enough that are probably getting put in that scenario as well, where they're being told, look, I'm not changing the art. The art's done. The artist doesn't want to work on it anymore, or I don't want to pay for revisions if there is such a thing. Most artists that I've worked with, when it comes to revisions, unless you've already given final approval, you revise that until it's good. But once you say it's good, if you go back and you want them to now redraw the thing that was good 2 weeks ago, now it's horrible and you need to redraw the whole thing, not like touch up or anything. I gotta redraw the whole page. Usually they're gonna say, okay, look, you gotta pay for that. You said it was okay. Now you're saying it's not. But how do you avoid that? You catch those mistakes as you develop. Thumbnails, pencils, inks, colors, etc. Giving your approval each step along the way. But if you are in a position where you're working independently and you've hired a freelance editor, essentially, that's usually how most of the time it works. You don't usually have, in some cases it happens, but you don't usually have an editor who's working with you through the start of the story to the end of whatever you finish with. It happens, but it's not usual in independent creator-owned comics. So the editor might be doing different things. Now, if you really, again, want to make the best possible story you can make, that's going to ensure that everybody involved, you look at those credits, you see who's involved, and now when they're involved on something else after that, they go, oh yeah, I remember they were on that, and I really like that. You want to make sure everyone can put their ego aside. I know, easier said than done, but it should be that way. Put your ego aside and make the best possible story. And if an editor comes in there and they're being hired, let's say, to proofread, but they notice glaringly obvious, very, very bad character development, story development, dialogue usage, stuff that's tonally inconsistent, maybe the art is also inconsistent. Consistency is key. I mean, consistency is a huge thing among everything, but in terms of a story, in terms of an issue, if within an issue or even within a page of an issue, you're noticing consistency errors in tone of writing, in art, in character design, proportions, all that kind of stuff. If you're noticing that and you don't say something, and you're the editor, I don't care if you're the proofreader. Honestly, I'm of the mindset, if you're on a book, you could be the letterer. If you notice things, you should say something. You should say something. Say, look, and you don't have to be rude about it. Be like, oh, this looks like trash. You know, what's going on here? But you could be like, you know, just giving you a heads up. I'm noticing that just when I'm reading it through that, you know, this part was kind of confusing, or the art here. I noticed, you know, 2 pages ago, this character looked this way. Now this character looks that way. You know, the perspective is a little wonky here. Speak up. Say something. You're a part of making that book. And I know a lot of people feel uncomfortable with that sort of thing. I've never felt uncomfortable with that because my heart was always in the whole aspect of we're trying to make the best thing possible together as a team. Now, if you're working with someone and they don't want to hear it and they're going to fire you, I tell you right now, that's the best thing that can happen to you on that book. If someone's coming along and saying, and you could tell when someone's giving heartfelt feedback and critique, or when someone's coming along and they're crapping on it. Usually whoever you hire isn't going to come along and just crap on it and be horrible and cruel and mean and rude about it. They're usually going to be relatively nice about it. They might be direct, but they're going to be nice about it. If you're in the mindset where you don't want to hear that, and you're like, look, you're being hired for X, Y, and Z, so shut up and do your job, etc., right? Like, that's what you're thinking. And you let that person go, you get someone else to replace them, someone who's coming along and says that because they care. If you're that individual that you got let go on a project because you cared about it and you wanted to give a heads up and look out for the best interests of the story, the project, the creators, the readers, best thing that can happen is you got let go. Go on to something else. There's a ton of people who would love to hear back from their creative teams that have their back and are looking out for them and their readers. And they maybe see something that you don't. But if everyone's running around like, I'm not saying nothing, I'm not supposed to say anything, and everyone's just comfortable with letting the glaringly obvious errors, you know, I'm not talking about someone that comes in there and is like, you should tell this story this way, that way, the other way. You know, this character should be red instead of blue. This one should be a guy instead of a girl. And blah. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about it within the context of the story, within the elements of what's being created. And when people are involved as a creative team on a book, everyone is aware. Everyone is aware when something looks great, when something looks pretty bad, when something's not coming across as interestingly or as clear as it could. It's important to be able to address that and come back with it. Now, maybe there's an explanation. So maybe you might be interpreting it a certain way, but that conversation is important. And that conversation is something that should be had. That's pertinent. That matters. And if you find yourself working with someone who doesn't want to hear it because it's their way or the highway, and they want to let you go, don't be sad about that. That's the best thing that can happen to you, because you're going to be stuck on a book that's going to look like crap. It's going to be bad. And your name is on there. And anyone reading that book is going to wonder, why didn't anyone say anything? And they're going to look at the credits and they're going to go, I don't know if I get anything else from these guys again. So if you get let go in that position because someone's got too big of an ego and doesn't put the story and their readers ahead of their own whatever's going on, that's a blessing. That's a blessing. All right, let's see here. I'm going to get back to the chat. See what we got. Killer Kovac says, if a character thinks WTF, would you use a bubble or just the text over their head? Now, it depends. The art should be doing the heavy lifting in that moment. If visually it's not conveying that the character is like in shock, you know, usually you can accentuate it and put like a exclamation point or maybe some kind of a saying or, you know, something along those lines, but nothing. I think if you went over the top with it and had them do like a whole paragraph, that's a bit much. But it's important that first and foremost in that moment, if there's shock, if there's surprise, the art needs to do the heavy lifting there. The character has to have an expression that correlates with that. 10-8. What's up, 10-8? Hope you're doing well. Thank you for being here. We got Rex Doom says, when I get to a point like things have slowed down, I'll leave a story at a place where I have an idea or two of what comes next and take a break. I find when I come back, the story flows even better. Yeah. I think that's the case for a lot of people. You know, and it's like that with a lot of things. Even just in life. You know, something could be driving you nuts, a problem that you want to figure out, whatever it may be. You know, it doesn't have to be working on a comic or anything like that. You know, being creative is just another way of saying solving a problem. That's all that is. So if you've got a creative job, if your job is to create, you are constantly solving problems. Most of the times, as a storyteller, you're solving problems that don't exist, and those problems you've created. And what I mean by that is that you're coming up with problems and conflicts, and then trying to figure out the best, most possibly interesting way to solve those problems. And that's what your job is over and over again. You create fictional problems and you solve fictional problems. Now, if you're talking about administrative and not creative, and you're talking about being creative with business and administrative type stuff, you know, there's a lot of problems that are going to come your way where hopefully you're able to figure them out and use creativity to do so as well. Sometimes you got to be more creative than others. Sometimes it's a very simple solution. Sometimes it's not so simple. Sometimes a little more complex. Sometimes it's like, again, I make the sports analogy a lot, but sometimes it's like those blockbuster trades that get like 4 teams involved, and this guy goes here, then he goes there, then the other team sends this guy there, and it goes, you know, and it's just this whole crazy map of how things flowed out to get to where you got to go. It's like a Rubik's Cube sort of thing. But sometimes those are the problems, and that's how they need to be solved. Where one piece has to go over and over again, working. You know, those little, like, what is it? Those little, I don't know the name of them, but they're like a puzzle thing where there's like a 9 grid, let's say, and you got 8 of those things there, and there's one space, and you got to keep moving things around, moving them around to make that whole complete picture. Sometimes that's how you got to solve your problems. And it's like that in comics and life, whatever it may be. But you're always problem solving. And if you're an editor, and that's your job. That's your job. You got to problem solve. And if you don't want to do that, and you don't want to problem solve, don't be an editor. Let's see. We got Headless Bourgeoisie says Claremont's editor on X-Men really liked to read. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it would take you like 3 hours to read an X-Men book. You got your you got your money's worth back in the day, that's for sure. But talk about the creative teams involved. Anyone that was involved with Claremont on X-Men, they knew how to keep the story flowing and let the art be present without being overtaken. That balancing act. And then usually the letterer, I think it would be like Tom Orzechowski. Fantastic. What he would be able to do. Man. Rex says, seems DC/Marvel editors only have 2 steps to their job. Ignore the art and cover half of it in a wall of text. And then, well, there's other things too I've seen where there's almost no text. There's almost no writing. You know, and the art isn't capable enough a lot of the time of telling that whole entire story. Talked about it with James Newen yesterday, talking about show, don't tell. And that kind of thing has been taken to such an extreme where a lot of people don't tell stories anymore. They sort of hint at them and they expect the art to show the story, but they're not really building up on this literary type level the writing. You don't see a lot of like this poetic kind of writing anymore. You don't see a lot of this writing that gives you deeper context into the characters, paints a picture with words. Not a lot of wordsmiths out there anymore. A lot of people who kind of go into it and it feels like, you know, you're watching an episode of Jersey Shore or something and that's the writing on your comic. You know, where's the poetry? Where is all of that beautiful use of language that comics were known for a while? Almost a superfluousness to it, but beautiful. You know, then it became, all right, well, let the art do the talking. But yet the art doing the talking at a time when we see more now than ever before, the writer being put on the pedestal. It's strange. Very strange. But again, that's the problem of the editor. I know you might be thinking, like, that sounds like it's a problem. It's the problem of the editor at that point. Big time. Let's see. Comics for Life says, what have you personally learned from editing? Bro, man, I gotta star all your stuff and get back to it. Seriously. Do not be offended. Keep them coming. I'm gonna get back to all of them because these are big questions. These are good big questions. Lizabar says, if you delete the script, it doesn't need any more editing. Modern problems require modern solutions. Yeah, exactly. That's one of the ways to do it. Headless says, when I was a kid, I blamed a lot of writers for terrible ideas that I later realized were editorially driven. Yeah, absolutely. Rex says, panels of facial expressions over and over. There you go. Comics 5 says, lack of storytelling is missing in movies and TV as well. Yeah, it's a kind of across the board. There's a lack of resonance. What I mean by that is there's a lack of things that people can latch onto in terms of what makes something universally true. Human experience really hasn't changed too much since the dawn of time. It really hasn't. I know the technology's changed, the clothes changed, they kind of come and go with the fashions. You know, how we communicate maybe has changed. All these superficial things have changed. But what's at the core really kind of hasn't changed that much at all. And to get away from that, to force the perspective, I think that's what's leading to a lot of stuff ringing hollow in terms of storytelling. You need that there. You need that kind of thing and that's how you ground a story. That's how you can have the most fantastic, ridiculous story. The setting, the placement, everything. Maybe even the characters, the character design, whatever it may be, the situation involved. But that's how you ground that story into being understood and having it have emotion that resonates. Because if you sit there and you think, like, let's say people will talk about like Star Wars, and they go, well, and this is a big cop out, to say, well, who knows how these people would behave, because they're not human beings, they're not on Earth, they're out there in space. So who are you to say that you're going to impose upon this story or this character or whatever how they're going to behave in this way? Yeah, but guess what? The story is being played for Earthlings. So if this story was being played for an alien race and being told to them out there, so when things fall short of your whatever story you want to tell, and that's a big cop out. I've seen that happen for people who try to come up with the shortcomings and make excuses for it, and for whatever. And usually sci-fi is a big one that people will go towards, because they say, oh, well, it's the future, or it's a different civilization, they're aliens, they're this, they're that. But the story is being told to human beings. It's being told to people. So if you don't know how to take that element and have it resonate with human beings, and you're going to make up an excuse for your shortcomings as a storyteller or whatever it may be, and say, well, this wasn't made for you, it was made for an alien race. But that's a hell of a pitch. Like, okay, well, I'm sure you're big in XLR9, but here on Earth, this is kind of how we would think that this character would generally behave in this scenario. And unless you want to detail otherwise by showing that this is their character and how they are portrayed consistently within these situations, see, storytelling, you can have a character behave in a totally weird way and be this alien life form, and that their motives, their behavior is completely different. But you have to show that that's how that is. You have to have them let you know that this is how they behave. This is what their emotions are like. Like, think of like Bizarro. Bizarro is acting in ways that to us everything he does is bad, but to him he thinks it's good. He's helpful. So if you can outline that and portray it with consistency, then it's solid. You can do that. It's like the same thing with language, character, etc. All of that. Storytelling is communication. So you have to maintain consistency. If you don't have consistency throughout, not only can you not have your audience trust in the story you're telling and the character you're developing and the plot you're developing, and again, this is where editing comes in as well, but you also can't effectively pull off a surprise or a twist. Because if you haven't been able to consistently build up the story and the character in a certain direction for a certain period of time, long enough to gain the trust of that audience, then when that twist comes around, because you've been so sporadic all over the place with the way that you tell that story and so inconsistent, it's not going to look like a twist. It's just going to look like another round of you not knowing how to tell a story. That's why consistency is so important in terms of that. And who helps you to maintain your consistency within your story? The editor. See, Eliza Barr says, all of my writing is aimed at the lizard people who have a secret base underneath the Denver airport. Also, they're 10-foot giant alien allies. Well, hey, they need representation too. Killer Kovacs, a love story. There you go. Okay, I'm gonna get back a bit. Hey, what's up, Rick Sailor? Thank you for joining tonight. I'm gonna go back to what I've starred here. Comics for Life has some really great questions. See, how hard is editing others as well as yourself at the same time, and what do you learn from playing both roles at the same time? All right, so a lot of people might say something differently than what I'm about to say, but I'm going to give you my take on it, what my experience has been. And so this is everything I'm going to be answering is within the context of my own experience. So it's much more difficult for me to edit someone else than it is for me to edit myself. And the reason that I say that is because at all points in time when I'm working on my own stuff, I make sure to take breaks, step outside of it, review it objectively to see if this is making sense within the context of the story, if this is something that I want to focus on or that should be focused on. Is this a character that's being developed properly? Are they being too developed at this moment in time? And I want to come back to them later on and just give little breadcrumbs at this point? Or do I want to give a big, hearty, full meal because we probably won't see this character ever again? So there's all different things to come up with in the realm of that story. Is that story that I'm making, is it serialized, episodic, ongoing? Is it a mini series? Is it a graphic novel? You have to have a different approach when you're editing on that level too. There's certain things when you have a bigger series, you can breathe a bit more with that story. When you have a mini series, the breathing gets a little bit quicker. And when you've got a one and done, that pacing needs to be dead on. You can't meander over here. You got to make that world smaller, and you got to focus more on the specific characters and what they're up against. Now, you always have to do that within the story you're making, but you really have to make sure you don't stray when you're doing that with a graphic novel. When you do it with a miniseries, sort of the same kind of thing. You want to make sure also if it's a miniseries being told through single issues or even chapters within being compiled later on for a trade. You want to make sure you're also understanding and utilizing effectively cliffhangers and different moments throughout the plot with different characters so that everyone is doing what they're supposed to do at service to the story. Everything they do serves the story. So even little character moments that define them further, that humanize them. They might seem frivolous, but those are little moments, and they have to be used sparingly. But those are little moments that maybe will really help to flesh out this individual. Now, when you have an ongoing series, you get a chance to have more of all of that. So you can really build up all these different elements. You can have more of these idiosyncrasies occur. You can have more of these kind of little character ticks here and there of things that they do to really fully flesh them out. That's why I love ongoing episodic kind of storytelling so much, because you could really do that. There's a chance for that character building and world building to work beautifully and to create something so immersive. And it's not like the other stuff isn't fun either, or can't be hard-hitting or effective or interesting or anything like that. It's not that at all. But on a personal level for me, I really love the longer series. I love being able to just sit down and see what's going on with this person or these people in their lives in this issue, in this story, this moment. I love that aspect of that. But a lot of what I've learned in terms of editing myself, I've been able to use that in terms of editing for other people. So in terms of editing other people, I talked about it before, where the biggest thing for me is always don't overstep and become a co-creator or a co-writer. Always have that kind of mentality where you are objectively detached so that you can edit appropriately. Because if you get too close to it or take too much ownership of it or create too much, you're giving too much creative input as opposed to editorial input and advice and guidance, letting someone know this is what to do, that this isn't clear, build up that, take that away, revise that, all these different kinds of things. And then if someone's coming at you and they have questions, you know how to follow them up and provide a fuller explanation. A lot of the time, I'll suggest that editors should do more. They should ask more questions than provide answers. What I mean by that is really get down to what story are you trying to tell? What are you trying to convey here? What is important to you that the reader knows? What characters do you want to focus on? What characters do you think the reader is supposed to care about? Who do you want them to care about? What are they doing? Have more questions than answers. Because the answers are easy. The answers are usually one of two things. Build it up or tear it down. That's generally what the answers are going to be like when you're an editor. But the questions are important, because if you don't know the answers from the person that's creating it and what their objectives are and the story that they're trying to create, you're not going to know how to edit. Because at that point, you're not editing. You're co-creating. Giving more and more answers to the creator, to questions that they didn't even ask. Answering questions that you shouldn't even be answering. You're not an editor anymore. Now you're a co-creator. Now you're a co-writer. So it's important to understand that fine line and not to cross it. Comics for Life says, do you find it hard not to look at other companies' books and think about how you would go about oh my Lord, yes. It's the same thing with, and I'm sure a lot of people feel this way too, but it's the same thing when watching, shows or movies or whatever, but especially with comics, it is very difficult for me. Even some of the things that I love, I'll look back and I'm like, that shouldn't even be in there right now. Why would they do that? Why would they have wasted half a page on that? It doesn't matter to the story at all. It's just kind of like an ego trip right here. So it is difficult, because I'm of the mind where you don't want to be necessarily too direct with your storytelling. And then it takes the drama. It takes the artistry out of it. But you do want to be clear. You don't want to be purposefully confusing. I've talked about this before. Some people think if you're purposefully confusing, if you throw chaos into it, it creates this whole big distraction and you're throwing the reader off the scent. But more than likely all you're doing is frustrating the reader, because you're not giving them a clear narrative to follow. And by actually giving them a clear narrative to follow, like I said before, in terms of consistency, you're able to do all the things that you think you're accomplishing by being confusing. You're able to actually do them in a far more effective way when you're being clear with your storytelling. You're actually able to lie easier to the reader and misdirect them easier by being clear and consistent with your storytelling than you are by being confusing and overly complex and pretentious and whatever else it may be. Because it's all about building the trust that this is how this character is, or this is what this scenario is like, or this is where this setting is of the story. And then when you get the truth, the objective truth thrown at you, not the subjective truth being told by the narrator, which is the writer essentially, when you get the objective reality thrown at you, that's when you actually get the subverting of expectations becomes a reveal, a surprise, and maybe even something you can look back and go, oh crap, I should have saw that coming. That's clever. That's entertaining. It's not entertaining to be presented with this confusing narrative that doesn't make any sense, and you have characters that behave in an inconsistent fashion, only to then behave consistently inconsistent, you're going to need to have, I mean, even a character like people would describe the Joker to be a character who's like consistently inconsistent, but he's still consistent. That's consistency still. So there's still something there to that character. It's different than telling the story that way, though. And that's something that's really important. Really, really important, especially when you're developing your world and your characters. Comics for Life says, what have you personally learned from editing other writers or artists, and it helps you hone your own skills because of it? Oh, man. What have I not learned? I'm constantly learning from... It doesn't matter whether someone would classify them as great or terrible. I'm always learning from everyone and everything. As far as creating goes, especially, there's things I see where if it's someone who is, or I think that what they're doing is fantastic, I do my best to try to learn and analyze and break down, well, what are they doing? Why is that working? Why does that speak to me? And then there's things where, conversely, when I see something that looks horrible, doesn't really speak to me at all, I don't like it at all, I break that down and I go, okay, I want to avoid doing those things. So there's always learning moments throughout. They don't have to just be, it doesn't have to just be learning from greatness and then trying to emulate it or achieve it. There's a tremendous amount you can learn from those that you think aren't doing something effectively. So I'm always learning. I can't tell you anything that I haven't learned. So when I'm editing specifically, I would have to say that it helps me as a creator because I'm more engaged and interacting in a direct way with what it is. So like what your previous question was in terms of reading other people's work, and I'm a viewer, I'm an audience member at that point. I can't go in there. I'm not a coach, I'm a spectator at that point, But once you get to be the coach, and now you get to tell that person, this is what's going on. You're going out there and this is what your approach is, and this is why it's not coming across successfully. This is why you're not effective with what you're doing. You'd be more effective if you did this. Try doing it like this. Pay attention to that. That is where not only do you get to learn more about them as a creator and what they're doing, but you get to learn a lot about you. I've learned a lot about myself through helping out a lot of other people with what they're doing. And a lot of people will ask, well, how do you go about getting a job as an editor or whatever it may be? Stuff like that comes about. I'm a strong proponent of the fact that type of position comes about through a natural evolution of your skill set and your experience. You cannot force that position to come about. You have a much easier time forcing your position as a publisher, because publisher is not really oversight on that level. It's way more black and white in terms of what you're doing. You have certain things you need to do, and then that's it. It's either done or it's not. It's either done the right way or it's not. But editorial, you need to know the ins and outs of it. You need to know the hows and the whys. The creative will give you the who, the what, and the when. But the other part of it, as an editor, you won't know until you get enough experience under your belt. Whether that means doing your own projects or helping others, or what I would suggest is a mix of both. Learn as much about the craft as you possibly can. Be as useful as you possibly can. Many people often think, Well, I've got an education, I've got a degree, I've got this, I've got the other thing. Someone somewhere said that, I was good at this at one time. Doesn't mean a damn thing. Doesn't mean a damn thing, because once you get put into that position, all of that simulation experience, because that's all that is. You can learn all day. But if you're not applying it and doing it, then none of it matters. None of it's real. You're just doing a simulation. So get in there, create your own stuff, figure out how can you be of use in that position. And that means that you're going to have to learn as much as you possibly can first before you ask other people to trust in you to make their project better. How can you even go into it? How can you go into it even and say, yes, I'm confident that I have what it takes to tell you what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong and why. And then if what you're doing is wrong, I have the confidence to properly explain it to you so that you can do it right. That takes time. That takes experience. That isn't just something you walk in there and you give it your best shot. Because even with experience and time, you're still going to be put into situations where you feel like, man, how do I approach this one? But if you go into it with no experience, very little confidence truly within yourself, how could you have confidence? You have arrogance at that point. If you have no place of competency in something, there's no way you're confident. You're arrogant at that point. And once you've got arrogance leading it, nothing you say has any merit to it, let alone authority. You have to lead with competency. And the only way you get competent is by having more and more experience. Figure out your own shortcomings and try to improve upon them as best as you possibly can. Learn as much as you can. Be more about learning. Read as much as you can. Study as much as you can about that. Analyze it. That's editing. Editing, basically, in terms of everything, is about analysis and then spitting back out to you what that analysis is. And if you can, and hopefully will, communicate that in a way that someone can understand that and take your analysis and improve upon it, then you're effectively editing. So there's a lot to it. A lot to it. It's not something to rush into. Don't view it as like that's how you get your foot in the door. There's a lot of people I've seen over the years with editing where it's like what I said before. They don't know how to play the game, but they think they can coach. Feel confident that you can play the game. You don't have to be the greatest to play the game either. You just have to know how to play the game. You just have to know what you're doing. You have to be competent. And then you can start feeling like, okay, I get my way around here a bit better. I'm still going to continue to learn. I'm still going to continue to, help out as much as I can. And the more and more that you do that, you'll find maybe, 2, 3, 5 years down the road, all of a sudden now you've got enough experience, you've got enough confidence under your belt because of the competency that you've built, where, you can edit. You can be an editor. You can proudly say that. That's why I think so many people, too, in creative fields have imposter syndrome. Because they feel like, did I really earn this? Well, if you worked your ass off and you put in the time and you've got the experience, you earned it. You would never feel imposter syndrome. But if you feel like you were given everything and you got where you got a little too fast, a little too easily, and you're probably going to feel the effects of imposter syndrome. Paul, thank you so much for gifting the 5 comic book radio memberships, man. Appreciate that. And for those that got it, enjoy. And thank you, Paul. Let's see here. Rachel says, how dare I? I don't know what it is, but I appreciate it. And I do dare. I do indeed. MD, what's up, MD Houghton? Hope you're doing well. Thank you for being here tonight. Better late than ever. Comics for Life says unpredictable storytelling does not always work. Exactly. Paul says the advice is free, but tips are always appreciated. Absolutely. Thank you very much, my friend. I appreciate it very much. Rex says tornado warning here. Guess I'm out. Thanks, Pete. Man, everybody stay safe with depending where you guys are. If you guys are getting tornado warnings, my thoughts go out to you. God bless. Hope everything's okay. Yeah, absolutely. Stay safe, Rex. Rachel says, Pete, how do you feel about computer-generated 3D models in comics? Like you could reference that stuff. I mean, that stuff is good, I think, for referencing, especially because if you can kind of twist things around and kind of but you should be embellishing and putting your own style in there, and it should be similar to any kind of reference where you're not literally like taking the thing and then doing almost nothing transformative to it. You should be just to give you an idea, to get proportion. And I think the best comic art, if anything, is when you take a reference, whether it's a 3D model, whether it's life, whether it's anything really. Hell, it could be other comic art. Tons of comic artists are always referencing comic art. But push it a bit, and put in something that's your own. But sometimes that doesn't happen. But I'm definitely not a fan of any of that kind of stuff where it feels like you're just kind of porting things over and coloring it and calling it a day or whatever. I like to see, I think the more, and I think this could really be said that it's true for almost every artist, if not every artist that's ever made comics. I think the more that you get involved with drawing, especially drawing, but same thing could be said for any aspect of creating comics or doing anything in life. The more you keep doing something, the more you keep, let's say, we'll leave it just to drawing here. The more you draw that apple, say it's an apple. The more you draw that apple, let's say you draw it 100 times. You don't need that reference anymore. You can draw that apple. You have it stuck in your head. That's the reference. Once you can get mental reference for things, and that happens, again, it takes time, and that comes with experience. That's why, you see some people, you're like, how the hell are you drawing that? What are you looking at? And it's like, oh, it's in my head. Because they've done it so often. You didn't see the 10,000 hours of them drawing over and over and over again, anything and everything. All of a sudden you're like, how do you know the perspective and the foreshortening and the composition, and you could draw this, you could draw that, you could draw the other. This is a big crazy computer up here. Everybody's got one of them. So that kind of thing, I love seeing that in comic art when it's not necessarily reference heavy, but it takes time. It takes time for an artist to get there. I think the most disappointing thing is when, again, like what I said before, where you see an artist that is capable of greatness. You've seen them do it. But they're relying heavily on reference. And when they rely heavily on reference, especially where it's so tempting nowadays to rely on maybe technology to really help in a big way, if not maybe sometimes do it for you, depending on what it is you're talking about with technology. It's so disappointing to see that, because all I could think is the artist must be feeling very insecure about what they're doing, or they're being put in a position to feel insecure about what they're doing. They're not trusting themselves. They've lost confidence. That's what it looks like to me. Because if it's not that, it's so much faster to just do loose sketches and build up what you have. So either you're not confident with it because you're relatively new, or you're not being edited appropriately to feel confident in what you're doing. So you're relying heavily on a crutch instead of relying on yourself and your own skills and what you're capable of and what you know you're capable of. So sometimes it happens. It's sad to see it when it happens. Comics for Life says, when you work on editing others, do you familiarize yourself with the characters, like read back issues? Oh yeah, I mean, so I know with King Cryptid, it's going to be a lot of issues in that. So I'm going to have to go back and reference certain things here and there. Make sure that certain things are being told in a way that makes sense within the continuity, within the consistency of the storytelling. And then if a character is behaving a certain way and I want them to come across a certain way differently than maybe the last time we saw them, that there's a reason for that. And that reason is conveyed and communicated in the story, not just, yeah, it's that way. The reader can just guess at it. The worst thing, I think, to be a reader or an audience member on anything is to feel like you have to come up with the story to make up for the shortcomings of the storyteller. Some people think that's interesting. I don't find that interesting. I find that to be lazy storytelling. And I'm here to be entertained. I'm here to soak in on your vision of story. And if your idea of being a storyteller is to have me do the heavy lifting and piece together everything that you're leaving out, I want to get paid then. I want to get paid in time and money for that privilege. There's too many people that I feel like there's a lot of stuff now where it's like, oh, well, that's, you don't want to talk down to, that's not talking down to the audience. That's you're telling a story. That's what they're there for. And then let them determine whether or not you told it effectively. But when you leave out big chunks of story and plot and character development, and because you think this is clever, I don't think that's clever. Maybe some people do. I don't think it's clever. I have a comic story that would benefit from a hybrid style. Well, there you go. Hey, Aloise, what's up? Well, good for you that it's going to be on a replay. I'm ending in a couple of minutes. Killer Kovacs says, that's why you draw a horse every day. Yeah, you gotta draw if you want to be an artist, you gotta draw every day. If you want to be a writer, you gotta write every day and read. If you want to be an editor, you've got to edit every day. There's people that are like, every day. Yeah, every day. Every day. If you want to do something with your life that matters to you, yes, you have to do it every day. Every day. Just be like a shirt. Every day is what it says on there. That's all. So someone could be like, what is that about? That's what I do. I do something every day. You have to. You have to. Otherwise, then you got no one to blame. I mean, you got no one to blame but yourself anyway. Same thing that happens with me. That's something the more and more I learn with everything throughout my life, throughout my comic career. I am to blame for everything that goes wrong. Because if you keep tracing it back far enough, you discover, wow, I did that. I put myself in that scenario at that point in time with this thing that happened. And that's why that happened. And you can own it, and you should own it, because it's empowering to own it, because then you can learn from it. If everything is someone else's fault all the time, you can never learn from it. It's like the Rocky Balboa speech in the beginning. You can't point fingers at everybody and that they're to blame for why you are in your position in life. If you trace it back long enough for everything, you're like, I did that. But there's a positive that comes out of that. Because if you did that, that means that you also have the power to do what you want to do and not just do the things that lead you down a path for what you don't want to happen. You have the power to lead you down a path for things that you do want to happen. And that's so very important to understand when you're creating a comic, when you're making what you want to make out of your life, out of your story, whatever it may be. You have that power. Comics for Life. Lopresti is a master when it comes to pulling this. Aaron is ridiculously talented. But I guarantee, and I've talked to him before, he'll be on the show again in the future. I'm sure I'll be on his again as well. Always a pleasure talking to him. One of my favorite people to talk to in this space. He's had a lot of experience. It's just, you don't just get to wherever you are right off the bat. It takes time. It takes a lot of time. Perseverance. Do it every day. Do it a lot every day if you want to achieve something. Make sure you keep drawing a lot every day. You want to get really good at it? That's the way you do it. And work on the little things. Some people think you got to work on these big things. Everything's got to be a big grand gesture of what you do, and that's how you attain greatness and success. The truth is that it's all about doing the little things really well consistently. And at the end, it looks like, it's like a painting. Get really close to it. It's a big, blurry, weird mess. Keep stepping back. And you go, oh, it's beautiful. And that's what that's like with everything in life. It's all the little things done really well. When you step back, all of a sudden it looks like a big, huge, amazing, beautiful thing. You didn't do one big, beautiful, grand gesture. It was all the little stuff done really well. Yeah, there you go. The Elvis Costello song. All right. I'm going to be wrapping it up here. Thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Again, in terms of editing, there is so much to this topic. It is far from proofreading, spelling, grammar, etc. A lot of people think editing is mostly that. That's just a part of it. And a very small part in terms of the importance of how that story is not just communicated, but how that story is developed and created, especially over time. So hopefully this helped. Hopefully this is something you guys can go back and reference. And thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. So everybody, thank you guys for being here. Thank you for those that joined the channel as members. Thank you for those, Cole and Paul, for giving out those memberships as well. Much appreciated. And it's great to be here to talk to you guys. Always appreciate your input in the chat. And if there's anything that you want me to discuss too with another topic on this show, on Comic Book Radio, please let me know in the comments. Reach out to me on Twitter if you want to say, hey, Pete, can you talk about this thing or this aspect or whatever it may be? I'm happy to do so. But exactly, Death Metal Hero says, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Yes. And says, as always, a great show, Pete. Appreciate you sharing your knowledge. I thank you, Death Metal Hero. I appreciate that, Luke. Means a lot. And Comics for Life, keep up the great questions, man. You're always giving good, solid questions. Nice, full meal questions. Something for me or when I have a guest, something for them to chew on. I appreciate that. Everybody, thank you guys so much once again. If you enjoyed the show, give it a thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed. All that good stuff. Sometimes YouTube kicks people out of here. Make sure that you are, in fact, with us. And other than that, I'll see you guys soon. I'll be back tomorrow. Fingers crossed that he remembers. He's usually pretty good about it. I should be on at 1 o'clock Eastern with Graham Nolan. That should be a fun show. So hopefully I can get that going. Everything is good over there, and Graham didn't forget. He usually doesn't. Hopefully see you at 1 o'clock tomorrow, again, Eastern with Graham Nolan on this channel, and that'll be that. Everybody, until then, have a great night and an even better tomorrow. I'll see you guys soon. All the best.